So today I want to talk about 10 Ableton tips that really I wish I'd have learned a lot sooner. Now, as producers, I think we're always learning stuff, either from other producer friends of ours or YouTube videos, but I think these tips certainly would have come in really handy when I was first learning Ableton. Okay, for tip number one, we're starting right at the start, so it makes sense to start at A. And A is one of the most important keyboard shortcuts that I've learned recently. And I say recently quite embarrassingly because forever I was always going into automation mode by hitting the automation button within Ableton. I was switching to and from those views to then edit my automation and go back. But just hitting A on the keyboard allows you to switch to and from automation. Honestly, it's one of those shortcuts I wish I'd learnt so much sooner. It's so much quicker to go between the two. Now you need to make sure that you do have your MIDI keyboard turned off, your MIDI computer keyboard rather. So make sure that you have this button at the top here unchecked. Then you can jump between the automation view and the normal view. Now this next tip has to do with exporting stems. Now, say for example you're doing a collaboration with another artist, or maybe you're sending your track off to be mixed and mastered, you'll need to export those stems. Now for the longest time when it came to exporting stems, I was going through soloing each individual track and then going up and exporting that as an individual stem. That took so long for me, and it wasn't until a little while ago, and it probably was maybe a year or so ago, but I wish I'd learned this so much sooner. Actually, within the export audio box, at the top here you have rendered track. You can actually choose all individual tracks, which actually renders out every single track within your project. So all of the stems, and it does it all automatically. It's not a case of going through every individual stem and then exporting it. It does it all at once, which is so much quicker than soloing them all. Now next up are packs, Ableton packs. When you buy Ableton, either intro, standard or suite, you'll get a certain number of free packs with it. Now I never even looked at these before. I just they were something that came with it, but my main concentration was Ableton and maybe some of the synths that were within it. I was always going to use third-party synths, but actually some of those packs are really, really good. If you go to the pack section within your browser, you'll see all the current packs that are installed, but you've also got loads of other options here for updates. So these are all the updates for the current kits you've got. So this will actually add more sounds to the kits that you've already got. So if you use some of them already, get them updated because there might be something new in there. And also all the available packs as well. These are ones that I haven't actually installed yet, but there's so much more in there that you can get, and the sounds are amazing that come out of them. So many tracks that I've done actually include the sounds from these packs because some of them are really good. They include some amazing instruments, some amazing samples, so I definitely recommend checking them out. You can actually go to the Ableton website straight from the browser here. From your account page, you'll see all the packs are available to you, and if you filter it by not yet downloaded, you'll see all the packs that you don't already have, and there's some amazing stuff in here. They're releasing new stuff all the time as well, so it's always worth kind of checking back here to see what amazing patches and instruments they've got. So before you buy that third-party suite of plugins and instruments and things like that, definitely check the packs out first because there's some amazing stuff in there. Now talking of third-party plugins, it might be tempting to jump for those amazing EQs, those third-party EQs with all those different features, because looking at the EQ8, it does look quite basic. There's not many controls within there. But there actually is. Hidden behind this little arrow button here, it'll actually open up this massive view for the EQ8, which really gives you so much more control. This is a control that I completely missed for a while because I didn't even notice the arrow was there. But once you got that open, you've got so many more controls here that you can kind of tweak, and it just gives you so much more room to see what's going on with that analyzer. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about sidechaining. Now usually with sidechaining we're thinking about using a compressor to duck one thing underneath the other, so taking a bass and ducking it every time the kick hits. But actually within Ableton there's so many different audio devices that you can actually have a sidechain with. So let's have a look at this example. We've got some keys and a kick going on here. So I'm going to duck that keys underneath the kick, and I'm going to use a compressor to do that. So I'm going to open up the arrow here. I'm going to select sidechain, select kick as my input, and then I'm going to decrease the threshold to get that ducking kind of effect. So we're getting that kind of classic sidechain kind of effect, but we can actually do that with an auto filter as well. There's loads of different audio devices within Ableton that you can do the sidechain with, but the auto filter has got a really kind of cool thing that you can do with it. So just like the compressor, I'm going to open up the little arrow here, click on this, and this will also open up a sidechain channel. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to select sidechain, I'm going to select kick, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with a few of these different controls within here to get the same kind of effect, but instead of ducking the volume, we're actually creating a filtered kind of effect. So just like we're doing the sidechain compression with the compressor and we're ducking the volume, with the auto filter we're just ducking certain frequencies, so it's kind of affecting the filter, which is a really cool effect. So the next tip involves one of the most simplest audio effects within Ableton, the utility, and actually the tip itself is so handy when it comes to bass. Now it's pretty standard that I'll put the utility on every single channel within my Ableton projects, but definitely on the bass channel, because this little bass mono switch here is so handy. This is something that I found out quite late about, but actually it's really handy, especially when it comes to bass, because generally with bass we want to keep those lower frequencies in mono. We don't want them to be in stereo because that takes up more room and it ends up with your bass being quite muddy. So really we want to keep those bass frequencies mono. Now you could make the whole thing mono. We actually have a switch here to make the whole bass mono, and if you've got a sub that might work just fine for you. But if you've got a bass with a whole load of frequencies, then you can actually use the bass mono switch here. Now the bass mono switch basically splits your bass in half. Everything below this figure, this 120 Hertz figure here, will be mono, everything above it will be stereo. Now of course you can adjust this, you can actually choose whereabouts you want this crossover to happen. So if you want more of that bass end, more of that subby end to be mono, you can increase it, or vice versa. I think the standard preset for it actually works quite nicely, and it's one of those things that's so easy just to enable, and it'll instantly help clean up that muddy bottom end. Now this next tip is really handy if you're working on a really small screen or maybe a laptop screen and you just can't fit everything in. When you're looking at a big project like this, for example, there's so much stuff to see that sometimes you just can't fit it all on one screen. And obviously if you've got a laptop screen, then there's only so much real estate that you've got. So what can you do about it? Well, actually there's an amazing control within the preferences of Ableton. If you go to the Ableton Look and Feel tab, you've got this zoom display here. Now by default it's set to 100, but you can actually zoom the whole of Ableton and really scale it out or scale it up. So say for example I can make this 80%, it'll actually zoom everything out. Everything gets perfectly zoomed, so perfectly scaled. So you can make this as large as you want, so you can fit so much more on screen if you want to. Yes, okay, it does get a bit hard to kind of read the text, but if you want to fit more on screen, then it definitely works quite nicely. Now I'm quite lucky, I've got a big widescreen display in my studio, so generally most of the time I have zoom set to 100%. But when I'm on the road and I've got my MacBook out, then that 17-inch screen really doesn't always display all that I want it to. So actually I usually have it set about 80%, and that just fits so much more in on the screen. Now whilst we're in the preferences, I'm going to show you a little tip that will help save your eyes. Now if you have a bit of a problem when you're staring at the screen late at night, it's probably because those blue colours are really going to start damaging your eyes. And you'll probably notice with most modern phones now, they'll actually kind of tint the screen a kind of orangey kind of colour. This just kind of gets rid of some of those bluish kind of colours that can be really harsh on your eyes at night. And we can do exactly the same thing with Ableton. So underneath the Look and Feel tab, you see there is a little control here called Color Intensity. Now we can increase this and it'll actually tint the screen. This is going to tint it to a kind of reddy kind of color. Doesn't matter what theme you've got, it will kind of give it a reddy kind of tinge. Now you can also adjust the color hue if you want to, make it a bit more yellow or a bit more green, but the whole point of this is we want to get rid of that kind of blue effect. So really we want to set the color hue to 0, which is kind of a reddy kind of color. And what we can do is just increase that color intensity just to kind of take some of those blues out of the screen. And this really will help your eyes when you're doing a late night studio session. Now this next tip is definitely my own kind of personal preference, but that overview bar at the top of the screen in Ableton, I never use it and it just takes up so much room. I just want to get rid of it, and actually you can do. So if like me, you're not actually keen on this overview kind of panel at the top here, you can go to the view menu and select overview. That just gets rid of it. I know it seems like such a really simple little thing, but if you're really struggling for space on your screen, just disabling features like that you don't actually use will just give you that extra bit. Now I know I've talked about this one before on my channel, but honestly, this one's going to save you so much time. And if you're not doing it already, you really need to be. Now, if you find yourself taking an Ableton effect, dragging and dropping it onto a channel, and then always making the same changes every single time, for example, with this EQ8, that bottom frequency, that bottom envelope, I want it to be a cut instead. And I always want it to be rolled up to 38 Hertz, for example. And also maybe I want to turn on oversampling. I have to do that every single time I drop that onto a channel. Well, actually, no, you don't, because actually you can actually save that as your default preset. So for example, if I drag and drop that EQ8 onto this channel again, you'll see it's completely reset. So what I'm going to do, I'm now going to set it up to be exactly how I want it to be. I'm going to turn on oversampling, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on here and choose save as default preset. It'll actually warn me, it will just tell me that it wants to overwrite it, which is perfectly fine. And then next time I drag and drop that EQ8 onto a channel, it's set up exactly as I want it to be. Now this will save you so much time. If you go through all of the different effects that you regularly use, set them up to be your kind of base standard, next time you then load them up, there's no tweaking. You don't need to do, you just get going with what you want to do. It may seem like such a simple thing, but honestly, going through and setting all those default presets will save you so much time in the long run. Now, speaking of saving you time, my final tip has to do with drum racks. Now, drum racks can be really handy for having multiple samples on the one MIDI track, so you can have a whole drum kit all on one MIDI track. However, managing those samples within that drum rack can be a bit of a pain sometimes. For example, we've got a kick here. If I go to the controls tab of that kick, I want to adjust the velocity to volume ratio. Maybe I want to increase that to 50%. If I want to do that with every single sample, I've then got to step through every single one of these, go into the control tab and increasing that again to 50% if I want it to be on every single sample within that drum rack. However, there is a quicker way of doing it. If you right click on this control and select copy value to siblings, this will actually copy that value to every single sample within that drum rack. So you can see if I go through these now, that's also got 50%. And so has that one, and so has every different sample within there. So let's try maybe transposing it. I'm going to transpose this up 3 semitones, and if I right click on this and go to copy value to sibling, that's now copied across all of the different samples within here. Now this doesn't work on every single control within a drum rack, but it does work on quite a few of them, and it will save you a whole load of time. So those are my 10 tips that I really wish I'd have known sooner. These are all tips, these are all little tricks that I've learned within the last maybe 6 months, a year of using Ableton, and I've been using Ableton for years. All these little tips, all these little things are just ways of moving around Ableton a bit quicker, things that I just wish I'd have known sooner. It would have made my life so much easier. That's why I put this video together, because I thought, well, if I didn't know these, maybe other people might not as well. So hopefully these have been handy to you, and if they have, definitely get subscribed to my channel, because I've got a whole load more Ableton tutorials on there, music production, there's a whole load of stuff on there. So definitely get subscribed, hit that notification bell so you're notified the moment I upload a brand new video, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next one.